Well, Shabbat Shalom. I just want to welcome everyone to the Sabbath Day conference call. This is Barbara serving as your host today. And today I have Brother Pete with me and Sally, his other half, which if you've ever heard of any of Pete's teachings, he will tell you she is his other half. So I just am happy to be at their home here. And today they are going to tell you, and maybe I'll ask them a few questions. They're going to tell you how they came to this path they're on the lunar Sabbath. So first of all, I guess I would say, did you go to Saturday church before or Sunday church?
I was raised in an Episcopal church in New Orleans. It was a high church, the cathedral. That's where the bishop resided. So it was very, a lot of fanfare, but it missed the substance. And I came out of that church, headed off to college, believing that good people went to heaven. That's how you got to heaven, was whether you were good or bad. I mean, well, you didn't go if you were bad. And I went off to college, and a particular fellow asked me on the street one time, he said, "Are you a Christian?" He was street witnessing at the campus there, and I said, "Oh, no, I'm an Episcopalian." That was the depth of my understanding.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think in another part of the world was a young lady.
I was a little country girl, and I went to a Southern Baptist church in a tiny, tiny town in West Tennessee, and I came to Christ as a 12-year-old, and I sat on a pew at a church when I was attending college.
A Baptist church Sunday.
A Baptist church. Sunday church, and I sat next to my husband Peter.
Oh, really?
So that's how we met.
And I might not have struck up the conversation, but I had a young man I had drug out of the dorms, and I said, "You need to come to church with me. There are a lot of nice young ladies you could meet," because he's very shy. And so I kept trying to shoehorn him, started a conversation with Sally, and shoehorn him in. It didn't work. But Sally and I talked a little bit, and I guess the rest is history.
So how many years have you been married then?
40
years.
Okay. Yeah, you better get the number right or you're in trouble.
I can tell you the date. But
and we met 45 years ago. After we got married.
But let me back up just a minute.
Okay.
On my side is I actually will say that I got saved while at college, and I heard Josh McDowell, Campus for Saved for Christ, speak about prophecy and the Bible, and it really caught my attention. I was basically hungry, but did not really needed things to dig into. Anyway, I won't go into the details there. Immediately kind of moved into more of a charismatic group. It's a long story of how I wound up there, but more of a charismatic group, which I don't resent at all, and there were issues there. But anyway, so then I guess as I came through college, I'm trying to remember how this all works together. But anyway, when I would my wife stayed in school, and I moved off to get to work, and we would keep contact. And some of the people back home said that we would be unequally yoked because I was charismatic and she was Baptist. Anyway, we don't want to make too much detail there, but we married and we raised our 5 children. We have 1 daughter and 4 sons, and we raised them all smack in the middle of the classical Sunday church, most often independent churches, but that has taken very well, maybe too well. But in that process, I think
good, right?
we were always not really totally satisfied with just whatever the pastor said or whatever some book said. We wanted to understand the scriptures deeper and went on our own journey, just digging. And I think I hit a day when I said, I felt like it was a glass ceiling. You would always have to have somebody tell you what the words meant or what the idioms were or something.
Yeah. And
I said, to go any further, I'm going to have to start looking at the original languages. Now, for somebody who's repulsed by academics, now I'm trained in engineering. I'm an aerospace engineer, but trying to learn languages was another whole kind of thing. But I did, and I went into Hebrew, and those doors, just learning the structure of the language, beginning to learn the definitions, what the language could say and couldn't say, and how the translators are coming from the text and what we read, really began to open my eyes to a lot, and that's where things really started.
Yeah. I think about 2014, I believe was the year, we had dinner with some friends. They were new friends to us, and they challenged us to think about Torah having more significance than we had previously given it. And they observed a Saturday Sabbath, and we began meeting with them and really appreciated them. And
did you know what Torah was?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure. And we
knew what it was, but I mean, the Old Testament.
We had long been drawn to Hebrew things, culture, right. But we just weren't in circles where we had a lot of companionship in that interest. We had since crossed the bridge that somehow we were New Testament people and the Old Testament didn't apply. We had already crossed that. I mean, meaning that we were saying, no, there's a continuum here. There's not old and new. This has to be consistent across.
Okay.
And I've always had great respect for, the entire Bible. If it's in the Bible and I can understand it, that's what I need to align my life with. But anyway, so we started observing the Saturday Sabbath, and about 6 weeks later, we found ourselves at a Sukkot festival at a campground in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Turns out Barb was there, but we didn't meet her then.
I was there camping in my little teepee.
We saw her teepee. We noted it.
We, in fact, came to that Sukkot meeting because it was a larger group that had met online, and they were following a particular teacher and had that teacher come and teach.
Joseph.
That was Joseph Damone.
Yeah. He was his passion is the Smithy years and things like that. So anyway, we kept observing the seventh-day Sabbath, and we would have Sunday dinners with our children. And then
so we had two Sabbaths.
Someone challenged us to look into the meaning of day. So we started looking into that, and immediately ran into information about weeks, and learned that the weeks that were observed at the time of Christ were not
consecutive.
The consecutive weeks that have gone back all the way to creation. So then we began studying that. We'd already noticed how there were so many Sabbaths associated with the feast, and we began trying to find out if the lunar Sabbaths aligned with those feasts. And of course, the more we studied, the more we found.
Yes.
And so then we began observing the lunar Sabbath.
Now, we're doing this on our own. We knew nobody else. There was nobody online. It was just us, and we were just weird.
And then we were meeting with our friends that had the Saturday Sabbath, and we were having Sunday dinners with our children.
So that's 3 days a week.
Then we realized you're supposed to work 6 days a week.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other half of the commandment.
Yeah. Pretty hard to do when you're keeping 3 Sabbaths.
Anyway, we have gone into just doing lunar Sabbath and trying to observe the feast as best we can.
Now, we'll say that we did that for about a year. We kept lunar Sabbath, and then we backed off. We went back to basically, I'm trying to remember what we did in that interim. It's hard to remember fully. We stopped keeping lunar for several reasons. There were some questions that hung over us, which I'll call these major questions. And in time, there were also some writers, I think, who had put up information, and I said, until I can sit down and go through all their arguments and, prove them right or wrong. So we were having this conflict. We're the only ones doing this. Our children are on a different schedule. Our culture's on another schedule.
Yeah.
So we finally dropped it for about how long, Sally?
I don't remember.
Okay, and then what brought us back? We began to see the answers to those questions.
Okay.
Those major ones, and those are covered in a lot of the videos, dealings. I think one of them we were just talking about, which was
Pentecost.
It was Pentecost, the count of Pentecost. High Sabbaths versus low Sabbaths.
Yeah.
That question of it was a high Sabbath one, and there was a third. I can't pull these off. I don't have a script. Anyway, there was a third major issue, a third issue that again all got resolved. Yes, 3 days and 3 nights.
Oh yeah.
The prophecy of quote Jonah. Again, all those were resolved to our satisfaction, and then there was, Katie barred the door. I mean, there was nothing left in us to resist it, and we knew it was right. And about that time,
our friend Ruth.
Yes, we went to a kind of a messianic Bible
Saturday
study
meeting, and
got off in a corner
and met somebody else who actually was observing the lunar Sabbath and studying it. And
knew this online gal who was Barb.
She introduced
Barbie.
us to Barb.
Yeah, that's right. Ruth, and I know you're here today.
Yeah.
So you connected us between Pete and Sally.
We're very grateful, Ruth.
Yeah. Dear friend.
So are your kids thinking you're pretty weird now? You've been doing this for what, almost 9 years?
Yes. Of course, lunar Sabbath is only part of our world, theologically. And so our children love the Lord, and they're all living in their lives. They have work, and we love them all dearly.
Yeah.
They also, if you think anybody, they have connections to other family, and the other families are, well, in a sense, are all church people, and many of them live closer to those. And anyway, the whole, so I think they haven't wanted to look hard.
Yeah, they don't really. It's hard to change because you have to work, and what are you going to do? How are you going to pay for your house and your car?
It can be work situations, but even just the family structures, and it alienates. It alienates the family.
Yeah,
it can.
Yep.
So, so that's where we have walked in that fine line. We of course love our children, respect it, and
well, what did you find out about the high Sabbath? A lot of, on the calendars it shows the 15th on the Passover week, unleavened bread week, or Tabernacles as a high Sabbath, but that's a weekly Sabbath too, right?
Well, the issue there was when Yeshua was being crucified, and I forget, the Pharisees, Sadducees say we need to take him down from the cross, for it is a high Sabbath. And what we realized is the word high is a translation of the Greek word mega, and you can look it up on your lexicons, and mega will often be referred to as high or big. We use the word mega in our culture to mean large and big. But what my finding was, as I really analyzed, not beyond what the lexicon says, I take all the verses and I analyze the verses for the contextual meaning of a word to understand how the author is using the word. And what I saw is that some appreciable portion, 20 or 30% of the use of the word mega are using it in the context of complete, to be full.
It's a full moon.
And so it's the Sabbath of the full is what he's saying. It is a full Sabbath, or the Sabbath of the full. And my contention is that what he is saying is that it's the full moon Sabbath, which is what the Pesach moon is. It's the second week coming into the lunar month, and it is the Sabbath of the full, because each of the 4 Sabbaths have their characteristic moon. There is a new moon Sabbath. There is a half or quarter, however you want to look at that, but first quarter, full moon, third quarter, and then your new moon Sabbaths. So those very much are known by people who keep lunar Sabbaths. So that resolved that question in our minds.
Okay.
It couldn't be. It's used by the culture to pretend that there are high Sabbaths and low Sabbaths, and it somehow they can hinge their whole belief that there are these two kinds of Sabbath systems running. The other problem with that is Sabbath literally comes from the word seven, and it means then the seventh. It is the seventh. It is the last of the days, and it means that you have to have. The commandment is keep 6 work days.
Yeah.
So you almost can't have a Sabbath. You can argue that you can't have a Sabbath unless you have 6 work days. If you got 2 Sabbaths running, you get what, 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, and so you can't get in your 7 work days to have a Sabbath.
Right.
You're not tired enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so like we have a calendar up here, and it says High Sabbath. It's highlighted as the 15th on that calendar. Did you have a comment too, Sarah?
I was just going to say that, we all of us are on a journey in our lives, and Lunar Sabbath was time for Peter and I to encounter Lunar Sabbath on our journey.
Yes.
And
it's a part of a much bigger complex.
And I appreciate that it sheds so much light on so much scripture from one end of the book to the other end of the book.
Good.
And, our family and our friends that don't share our enthusiasm for Lunar Sabbath, I feel like it's just not time for them to encounter that in their journey. And at some point it might be, or maybe they'll never get to that. But they'll have other significant things that they need to encounter on their journey.
It's a lot like, and you say it's a part of a puzzle. It's kind of like working out. You're working a puzzle, and you wind up with these groups of pieces, and you can't figure out how they connect. And suddenly you find the piece that registers one sector of that puzzle to the other sector, and then suddenly pieces start falling in. It all starts tying into one, as opposed to having these separate parts all floating around independently. It very much happens like that.
The feast days help you connect the New and Old Testament and the calendar.
Truly.
Yes.
Well, how did you resolve the Jonah problem? 3 days and 3 nights.
The Jonah issue, we found that first off to be just face accepting of what the Scripture says. There's no way to connect third day with 3 days and 3 nights. They just don't go together. Right. You can do the gymnastics and cram them together, but they don't naturally to go together. And we noted that the prophecies of the third day are not just in the New Testament and in multiple places. Sally, remember the number.
Oops, sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
Would not just be in the New Testament. There are numbers of prophecies and imageries in the Old Testament pointing to that third day. And so as we began to look at the prophecy of Jonah and kind of really struggle with it. The tendency in Christendom, in classical Christendom, is to take every prophecy in the Old Testament and make it fulfilled at the cross. Now that's very nice, but what we wind up doing is forcing prophecies to be fulfilled when they weren't, which means we're not looking for them to be fulfilled in the future if they're, if you will, cocked and loaded for fulfillment. So we came to the conclusion that the prophecy of Jonah, number one, is misunderstood, and number two, was not fulfilled in that event. Jesus did rise on the third day. He was crucified just before the Sabbath. He was in the tomb during the Sabbath, and he rose immediately on the third day. There are no dual Sabbaths. That's where you get your dual Sabbaths in there when you start trying to put the Jonah prophecy in and get 3 days and 3 nights. It all becomes crammed together there. So our again, talking about your puzzle pieces, how when you work out one area, you start seeing things in one area, and then you realize they join, and all these parts start to fit together. is we were noting in another, let's call it another study, kind of an ongoing thing in the back, was the concept of millennial days. And the concept of millennial days is that many of the prophecies, many of the discussions of days in Scripture are not 24-hour lunar days, but that they are ages of 1,000 days. Now, let me back up because we get to, of course, what is it, 2 Peter right away, which says, "For by the Lord, according to the Lord, let's see, with the Lord, a day is as 1,000 years."
Right.
Now, let me clearly separate that many idiots try to take that passage and say that, what's happening is Genesis is not 7 literal days long, but it's 7,000 years, or convert it to 7 periods of time, or convert it to 7 million, or 7 billion, and pretty soon you have, you've squeezed evolution, an infinite amount of time in here for anything to happen, which becomes a magic box. So I'm not saying that at all. The idea is, for those that are not aware of it, that the concept that the ancients apparently held was that the creation, this time period we live in, would be 7,000 years long. And you can put it right in against much of what the classical church holds, that there will be a millennial time to come, which is a wonderful period of time where we rest from all the evil forces in the world. And in fact, the Father says, talking about people who rebel against him, they will never enter my rest. And what we're saying here is that the 7th day, the millennium, is a 1,000-year period. So now, when you look at the passage, it says, the day of the Lord, let's see, the day of the Lord. We talk about the day of the Lord. And most of us are taught to think, well, that's a 24-hour period. He's going to come back and clean house and fix everything, and then we're going to enter the millennium. No, it's probably saying that it is the 1,000-year period, quote, day of the Lord. We use that ourselves. Back in my father's day, it wasn't a day. It was the age in which he lived. Age, yeah. So when we began to put that together, how did that come to the lunar Sabbath, Sally? Yes. So you can see Jonah's prophecy, and I had somebody else pointed this out. I guess I was able to hear it. Is what was the prophecy of Jonah? What did Jonah prophesy would be a sign? What was the thing he prophesied? He didn't prophesy he was going to be in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights. He prophesied that Nineveh was going to be destroyed. And so what I offer is that the Jonah prophecy that Jesus refers to, he's talking to an evil and adulterous, and we translate it generation, but I think he's saying an evil and adulterous people, and who will never hear his truth. And he says they're looking for a sign, but the only sign they're going to see is at the end of 3 days, 3,000 years, they will see the destruction that Jonah prophesied. So that's the way I see it. The point is that may be accurate, it may not be, but we do not need to force it into being fulfilled in that time, in that time period.
Okay. Did you think of any comments or anything?
No. Just look at the scripture.
But it is. There's 2 parts. One other thing I want to say is, when Yahweh opens the door to us of understanding, if we stay outside, if we hover outside, there are things we will never learn.
That's very true.
Right.
If you don't keep a feast, you can't from outside analytically deduce how it's going to come out and extract the truths of it. I'm trying to think of some examples. Maybe Sally can think of one here. But when we were faithful and said we would start keeping the feast, because he calls us to keep his feast, and by the way, the earth is keeping all false feasts because people need a feast. We need our times to kick back and enjoy family and get together, and so we make them, but we don't keep his. So as we started keeping them, there were things we realized in the process of keeping them that would not have become apparent
like
without
all these feasts here?
it. Yes.
Oh, wait, I got to get on the screen.
Uh-huh.
Are you talking about some of these?
I am talking about some of those. And they're all substitutes for Yahweh's feast.
Yeah. For these.
Yeah. Yep. So when we started keeping a lunar Sabbath, when we started keeping feasts, when I grew my beard out to my knees, no, I'm probably missing out on that. I mean, whatever there is to be learned, I'm probably not getting it. So I'll even admit that. But to the degree that we can and are willing, I think God, the very aspect of doing it opens your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, well, I'm glad that we found each other somehow. I guess through Ruth, and yeah. I don't know how I found Ruth, but we all got connected through the Father connecting all his people together, isn't he?
Yes.
And that's what he's doing with the YouTube channel too, and the website. And if you want to access more information about the calendar and the sign of Jonah, or can you keep the Pentecost if you keep Lunar Sabbath, or what high Sabbaths are, any of those topics, they're on our website, lunarsabbathday.com. So, and I hope you'll go over there. And you'll also, if you listen to any of the YouTube channels, you'll hear Brother Pete on a lot of them, because he is the co-host many times. So today you got to see a little visual of what he looks like. So I'm going to close the recording. We have a wonderful group of people here today, and we're going to go ahead and continue chatting with Pete and Sally. So I'll say Shabbat Shalom to those on the YouTube channel.